you like sci-fi, fantasy, action, adventure, and comic books? Then you've come to the right place for your weekly dose of anything and everything geek. So strap in and let's get this show on the road. Welcome to the Science Fictionary podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Science Fictionary podcast, a podcast brought to you by the ScienceFictionary.com, where we discuss everything in the world of sci-fi, fantasy, action, adventure, and superheroes in the world of pop culture. I am Daniel, and join me tonight are Marisha.
Hey, everybody.
Andrew.
What's going on?
And David.
Hello.
All right, so this episode, we're continuing with our Pillars of Sci-Fi series, and this one will be in the world of film. Which movies we feel like really help set the foundation or the cornerstones or the pillars of science fiction. So I'm going to let Andrew start with this one. Marisha started our last category when we did television, so I think it's Andrew's turn.
Okay, so I had to kind of step back. After the TV episode, I kind of started to kind of reevaluate how I looked at this. I was still happy with my list from TV, but not necessarily at how I arrived at it. It was a little more like Daniel talked about last week, where you tried to find certain tropes from sci-fi that are prevalent and try to find early examples of those things.
Right.
So it was kind of like that, but then realizing that the literature, the books, are really the foundation. And that everything, TV, movies, everything else is really built on the books, on the novels, on literature. And then, so because of that, really, I tried to steer away from things, and I did this with TV too. I tried to steer away from things that started off as literature, whether it be novels or comics or things like that. And so with film, the idea, I guess, what I finally came up with was trying to, knowing that a lot of these movies are influenced heavily by the novels, they're influenced by comics, they're influenced by film serials, influenced by TV. And so the idea became, where can I find examples of sci-fi that either in film that either presented something brand new or that did something so well that it stepped out of the shadow of the things that came before it. And so I'm going to do like I did before. I'm just going to go earliest to latest. The earliest thing on my list, and I was kind of torn on this one because I had several ideas, but I also tried, I didn't want to lump everything. It would be real easy to do this list with film and have everything be dystopian futures.
Right.
You could do 4 of these and they could all be dystopian, and I made a really strong effort to not do that.
To shake your genre up a little bit.
Right. So kind of the first genre I really stepped back and looked at were monster movies. So critical to what science fiction is, and we go back. I had things on my list, my working list, like The Creature from the Black Lagoon, Godzilla.
That's the first one popped in my head.
But the one that I really settled in on is the original 1933 King Kong.
Ooh, great movie.
It's a great movie. It did so many new things that had not yet been done. I mean, TV was still pretty young. Film was still very young. There was a lot of innovation, a lot of things about technology laced throughout the movie. It was really one of our first monster movies. Weren't something new, but this was one of the first ones that put the monster front and center and made you empathize with the monster. Or really kind of did what Frankenstein did and said, who is the real monster? Because of those things and being such an early example of the monster movie genre, which was not something we did a lot of. I mean, there are novels that explore this, but the modern or the monster movie was kind of something new. And because of that, I'm choosing King Kong as my first entry.
Okay. No, perfectly okay with King Kong. That's I actually wish I had thought of it. Definitely belongs there. Um, Marisha, what would your first entry be?
All right, so I'm going to. It's interesting. Andrew started telling me about kind of his criteria that he was looking at, and I was like, well, that's funny. I was kind of having the same internal conversation. So I kind of tried to go because I was like, I was looking like, what are the like first instances of several different tropes showing up in movies, and like the first four time travel movies were all adaptations of The Time Machine. Which, I mean, of course, the time machine is really important, but the time machine as a movie didn't really like drive anything forward for the genre. It didn't really affect anything other than just trying to do some justice to the original story. So I kind of I spent way too much time on the internet, y'all, looking at a whole bunch of different things. But I did land on a movie that I had never actually heard of, but it seems that it was really a sort of weird marriage because it was a sci-fi movie, but it was also a comedic musical. It was called Just Imagine. It was made in 1930. And initially I was like, well, that certainly doesn't count. But I kind of started reading a little bit and watching some clips from it. So basically the premise is it's the 1980s and this group of scientists decide that they're going to revive this guy that was struck by lightning playing golf in the 30s. And so they do. They revive him and they bring him back. And, he's got all this weird, goes to this future where, they get babies out of vending machines. And no, but people don't have names. They have letter number designations and they fly around in cars. And altogether not like the 80s, if anyone is keeping track. But it seems like it, in the same way that Back to the Future kind of decided not to go for how we think how we think that 2015 is really going to be. They really went for a more like, what would be fun? What would be a fun way to present 2015? That's sort of the same direction that Just Imagine went. And yeah, it's a full-on musical, y'all. It is the most bizarre thing that I have possibly ever seen. But it was the first time that time travel has always been one of my favorite genres. The first time that time travel was approached from a lens that was not taken from either Connecticut in King Arthur's Court or The Time Machine. And so it kind of, it was one of the first pictures of here's the world your grandkids are going to live in, which has kind of been a popular trope in time travel movies ever since then, is, try and imagine the world, not the far off world, 30,000 years in the future, but what is the world that we're actually creating? So anyway, that's my first on my list.
Interesting.
Okay. And I'm actually really interested in what David's picks are going to be. So
Right. Yeah, David's picks may be very different than ours.
Well, he has
I'm
a different point of
interested in
view
what
on
David's
things.
picks
Yeah.
are going to be too.
Well, there's a full there's a full generational gap there. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like to think I have some pretty solid picks. These are ones I'm pretty confident about, as opposed to our previous sections. And sort of get this out the way, Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies ever. And I was going to put it on my list, and it was on it until Andrew made a great point that I really liked, that a lot of stuff started as novels. And yes, Blade Runner has outshined, I think it's fair to say, Blade Runner has outshined Do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. But during the novel, I put Do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep on my list and talked about it a little bit there. So I decided, you know what? I like that point. I'm going to leave it off and I'm going to replace it with something else that I want to talk about. And this also started as a novel, I believe, but this outshined it so much that most people don't even know it's a novel. And my first pick is Jurassic Park.
Yes.
Because when that movie came out, and I didn't feel the impact. From my understanding, and even watching it now, I can tell, that movie changed people's lives and their interpretations of what movies could be and what they could look like.
It did. It's one of the films that we're going to talk about a couple of them tonight, but that's one of the ones who kind of changed the way films are made.
It didn't
Exactly.
just
And
change sci-fi movies. It changed movies. It changed the way that people look at culture. And my first, my obscure 30s musical sci-fi movie does not fall into this category. But most of the things on my list are the things that everything after them has been compared to. And Jurassic Park is one. Anytime anybody makes a dinosaur movie, makes a movie with animatronics. Jurassic Park.
Now look at this. Of course, Steven Spielberg, probably the greatest director of all time. His repertoire is just unmatched. The movie is beautiful. I've, of course, seen it since numerous times, and it blows my mind still watching it. As a fan of filmmaking, it blows my mind what they did, especially back then. The dinosaurs are beautiful. It just, the same way that the characters feel when they're seeing it is the same way that I feel, and I'm sure it's the same way that all those kids in the theaters felt.
Yeah.
It did something that sci-fi is incredible for doing, and why I think we love sci-fi so much. One of the reasons, at least, it brought something completely absurd that we never thought we'd see. It brought it to life. Dinosaurs are walking around. These scientists did something that sounds, I don't know if this is actually possible, but it sounds like, ooh, this could actually happen.
Well,
and they brought dinosaurs to life.
There are real advancements that are happening that are moving towards. I mean, they move closer every day to bringing mastodons back. It's this whole
Terrifying to me.
And
Don't see
again,
that.
But it does what good science fiction does. It presents something and makes it plausible. And the people took a look at that and went, maybe.
It inspires the next generation of scientists to do it for real.
But it did Jurassic Park does some wonderful things with taking, we've talked about all the subgenres of sci-fi. And Jurassic Park does some wonderful things with taking a number of those and putting them together in one thing. It's a legit, the science is critical to the story.
Yeah.
But it's still a little bit of a monster movie, and it kind of sits on that line of kind of being a horror film, a sci-fi horror film.
It is. And it's a great film. When you watch it now, I like Jurassic World, but of course none of the sequels have touched this movie. It's what a magical movie. And what made me think of it was I actually just read earlier today that the theaters that are open in America, there's not new movies coming out, so they're playing a lot of classic films. And right now, Jurassic Park actually topped the weekend's box office. Was the number one movie at the box office after like decades, because movie theaters are playing classic movies, and people are going to the theaters and they're still seeing this movie, and it still blows people's minds. So, it's number one at the box office,
right? And so
30 years later,
here's what I would say for Jurassic Park, for people my age, really, is that the way that, because I wasn't alive in 1977, but the way that those opening moments of Star Wars blew people away in 1977. This was the closest I ever got to that, to having that, just sitting in a theater with my jaw on the floor going, well, what is happening? Not
an accident they both had John Williams scores either.
Incredible. And I'm gonna talk about John Williams some next week in our miscellaneous category.
Yeah.
But Jurassic Park's amazing. It does a great thing sci-fi does, and it does my favorite thing sci-fi does, which is it makes you think. That great line. They were so worried about if they could, that they never stop long enough to think about if they should. I love that. I love Jeff Goldblum so much, so very much with all my heart. Jurassic Park's an incredible film, and it does everything a good sci-fi film should. And it changed movies. It changed cinema.
And it's it's again, it's one that is always referenced anytime people talk about, say, bringing mastodons back. Somebody is inevitably going to say, "Didn't they see Jurassic Park?"
Yeah. Well,
And
they
that's
tell
the
the
thing
truth.
about
There should be a cautionary tale.
great sci-fi is it becomes, that sort of thing. It's like that thing that whenever real world things start getting just that weird, people reference back to that. And Jurassic Park is definitely one of those things.
All right, Daniel. So what do you have first on your list?
Um, Actually, I have Metropolis.
Nice.
I think everybody probably knew I was going to have it. This is the kind of stuff I do. 1927. And not only do I feel like that's really early example of just sci-fi in general as far as film goes. It we talk all the time about how sci-fi can be used to make social commentary and how it does it so well. And not only is this film one of the first sci-fi movies ever, it did that. It is literally, it's set in the year 2030. It's a future we haven't even got to yet, although we're not too far from it. But the industrialists and the wealthy in this world literally live in 1,000-story skyscrapers. And they literally live on top of the people who run the whole thing. The working class live and work underground in the machinery that makes the city run.
It's a little Brave New World, isn't it?
It it's a little different from Brave New World. It is again though. David mentioned the movie earlier on our previous episode that has a social hierarchy stacked from top to bottom. This does that. So it's a theme we continue seeing being used. I mentioned Snowpiercer. It's Snowpiercer's social hierarchy from rear to the front. This film does take a spoiled, pampered, sheltered youth who lives at the top of the building, and he has a reason that he goes down below and finds out the way other people in this city live at the bottom, and decides he wants to do something about it. So it's very much that social commentary that we see carried forward in so much of the science fiction we still know and find interesting today. It introduced the idea of a future with a huge social divide. It also introduces the idea of droids, for lack of a better term. The term may not have been used in that film, but that's essentially what they were. There is a prominent robot character in the film, and so Metropolis, I think, that is my first entry, and I really think that was the beginning of a lot of what we see in sci-fi in film. So I have Metropolis. Andrew, what was
good choice.
Yeah. But David, Andrew, what was the next one on your list?
Okay, so I really kind of got in this back and forth between It Came from Outer Space and The Day the Earth Stood Still. And I ultimately decided to go with The Day the Earth Stood Still. It's from 1951.
You made the right choice, sir.
They're both pretty important. It Came from Outer Space literally created several character archetypes that we see carried forward in a lot of science fiction. But The Day the Earth Stood Still, you're in a early Cold War era, post World War II. It's some of the earliest It's some of the earliest kind of atomic age warnings about using atomic weapons. You see, and it was also a lot of the times, a lot of the alien movies prior to this were alien invasion films. They're, we've come to conquer Earth, and this one's not. We get this being that shows up and delivers a warning. Kind of sees what's going on, delivers a warning to the world, and says, "You have to stop, or you're going to be destroyed." He goes through the whole political machine. He can't get to talk to the people he needs to talk to because he's given all these nonsensical political reasons for why he can't do certain things, and we just see so much of it's a movie that's still relevant. It's about about seeing what's coming down the road and changing directions before you come to an end. And characters like Gort, the giant robot there with Klaatu, and there's so many things about this movie that are still relevant today, and it's ultimately why I decided to go with The Day the Earth Stood Still.
And I think that that's definitely a worthy entry. That's one of those movies that tries to use sci-fi to deliver a message. But Marisha, what was next on your list?
All right, so next on my list, I have Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because it's one that has managed to, even people who have never seen it, it's sort of ingrained itself as like a classic sci-fi horror trope. Is that like that idea that the aliens come and they replace us? That they take away everyone and they replace you with these mindless replacements. I don't know. I can't come up with a better word.
Doppelgangers.
Doppelgangers. There we go. Yeah, these mindless doppelgangers, and it's one that kind of gets it. Kind of is a kind of a recurring theme. Like I said, in spite of the fact that a lot of people haven't actually seen it, but the movie's been remade a couple of times. The original version, though, was made in 1956. So it wins my second spot.
That's cool.
Because it's so very creepy.
Yeah, I like that. That you wouldn't get a lot of sci-fi horror movies. Like something I considered putting on my list was Alien.
Yes.
Probably don't get Alien without that movie and others like it. So
what was next on your list, David?
Next on my list, and this is the one that I actually battled back and forth between this and Alien, I went with Terminator / Terminator 2, because Terminator 2 is better, but Terminator was still really good, and the first one. So we're just going to say Terminator. Terminator, especially Terminator 2, is one of my favorite movies ever. I've seen Terminator 2 countless times. I love it so much. It is so freaking awesome. And isn't that what we all want from sci-fi? Just to watch something freaking awesome. Terminator is the ultimate science fiction action movie. And you could argue that it's like, oh, it's an action movie. It's science fiction. It is it's time travel and evil robots and all that kind of stuff. And it's inspired so many science fiction action movies. Every action franchise wants to be the next Terminator, It's great. It's probably the best, at least from what I've seen and what I know, and you probably have a movie that does it way better that I don't know about, but probably the best handled time travel movie. At least in my opinion, I love the rules. And people try to argue, like, actually time travel would work. Like, you don't know what time travel would work like because it doesn't exist. So
Right.
Stop it. I love the rules that it establishes in Terminator. I love the paradox, and you're thinking, like, wait, but if he sent Kyle back, then how is Kyle his dad? Because if he never sent him back, then he could be born, so he can never send him back. And I love that. I love the idea of Skynet, the evil AI. I mean, that gets referenced in everything now.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure Tony Stark made a joke calling Ultron Skynet in Age of Ultron. I'm pretty sure like that's been done before. Like it's referenced in everything. Like, oh no, Skynet, or how. But I love that, and the movie's incredible. It's a great movie. The action is top notch. It is excellent filmmaking. I love filmmaking, and one of my favorite shots in any movie comes from Terminator 2 when Sarah Connor is doing robot surgery on the Terminator, and they actually do a thing where it's the mirror shot, but actually it's not a mirror, it's a window, and you have Linda Hamilton's twin sister on the other side of it doing it with a model of Arnold's head. Like, that's filmmaking, baby. That's awesome. So I love that about it. It's such a great movie to watch. Everything wants to be Terminator. It is the ultimate science fiction action, time travel, evil robots, evil AI, post-apocalyptic. Everything that some of my favorite things about sci-fi are peaked in Terminator. It may not have been the first to do those things, but in my opinion, it is the peak of a lot of those different tropes.
So Terminator was on my working list.
Yeah, mine too.
Because it met the criteria that I gave myself of the first example of something that stepped out of its predecessor's shadow. It's the first real instance of time travel that steps outside of H.G. Wells' shadow.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that one. Terminator, the first two Terminator movies are. Terminator 2 is the best sequel ever made. So, but the next one on my list, and I'm actually still trying to decide between two. I keep waiting for something on my list to come up on somebody else's, but it hasn't yet.
Right.
So I am actually going to go ahead and give Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes. Yeah, and just as a franchise, period, the newer Apes movies are so good.
So good, yeah.
I love them.
And the original Planet of the Apes, of course, is a classic, and it is, and it's one of those movies I can watch over and over and over, and in a lot the same way that Andrew's last entry with Day the Earth Stood Still made a commentary about nuclear war. So did Planet of the Apes. It was one of those, but it didn't do it to the very last scene, right?
Right.
Damn dirty apes. Right?
That was they did it. But no, that was one of those we're going to screw it up movies. And we need to pay attention to the choices we make as society, and we need to pay attention to choices we make as human beings. It was just such a brilliant movie, and has again continued to be at the forefront of our consciousness as consumers of science fiction.
Yeah.
Like I said, the last few movies make a commentary of a different type in an equally effective way. That entire concept has continued to move forward and be really effective. So I put Planet of the Apes on my list. Andrew, what did you have next?
Okay, so next on my list, I've got one that I sort of wrestled back and forth over whether to put it on a sci-fi list, but ultimately it belongs, and it's Star Wars.
Wait a minute.
Same wrestling.
You wrestled to put it on a sci-fi list?
Okay, so it is science fiction, but science fiction usually is something that exists within our world. It's our tech or something that we could strive towards, where this is science fiction in a fantasy world. But that's ultimately where I landed. I kept looking at it's fantasy. It's ultimately fantasy. But what's interesting about it is that it is science fiction in a fantasy world. And I know, and part of the reason I was wrestling is because I know down the road we wanted to do kind of the same sort of thing with fantasy, the fantasy genre.
Right.
And ultimately I decided that yes, it can be in both.
Well, and it has been so influential on sci-fi. Star Wars is what made sci-fi a thing again.
Right.
I mean, even Star Trek, the motion picture, really picked up steam after Star Wars was so successful. Pretty much everything you read through, like, list of important sci-fi, and it was like, and sci-fi fizzled until Star Wars. And then all of a sudden, Star Wars was a hot ticket item. I mean, sci-fi was a hot ticket item
Well,
again.
it wasn't just a hot ticket item, and it was the dominating. Star Wars started something that the genre would become the dominating force at the box office for decades. It still is. That's
Yep.
I mean, that's what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is.
Yep.
Is science fiction, really.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put your mind at ease. It absolutely belongs on the list. Like, come on, dude.
Well, I know, but knowing that it was a matter of deciding whether it was something that I would put on both of my lists.
Yeah, if you had to pick one. But I think,
Well, I will tell you, I will probably only put it on one of mine, but this is the one I'm putting it on. I think we all have Star Wars, right? Does anybody not have
I have
Star
Star
Wars on the list?
I mean, Star Wars has got to be on the list. I mean, I was going to pick something
Yeah.
else because I knew he was going to talk about Star Wars.
Yeah, it's on my list too.
But it has to be because it's, like I said, there is no modern sci-fi without Star Wars.
Well, no movie has ever had a bigger impact on the
Pop
culture
culture.
than
At all.
Star Wars.
Yep.
Mhm.
And it's the thing that
You're right,
everyone
and
all of a sudden started trying to recreate that magic, that feeling that people got when they sat in the theater. That's all of a sudden sci-fi went from like it's this weird thing with weird concepts to it's a huge cinematic experience. So anyway, yeah.
No, and Andrew, to make you feel a little better, I actually had the exact same debate with myself before putting it because I had the same thought. We're probably going to do this with fantasy later.
Right.
And to me, I view Star Wars as a fan. I watch it as a fantasy, right? Like when I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, this is a fantasy movie.
Yep.
But of course, it is science fiction. I mean, spaceships and
Right.
pew pew and
Yeah.
lightsabers and all that kind of stuff. It is science fiction. But I do understand your debate. But of course, it's on the list. It's also just the first three movies are nearly flawless in my eyes.
Right.
It's great filmmaking.
It's why
that's a reoccurring theme.
Yep.
it's why, despite the fact they keep making Star Wars movies with all the modern technology, they've yet to surpass the originals.
Yep.
You're exactly right. And a reoccurring theme that keeps popping up with the stuff, at least on my list, is that they're all great examples of filmmaking. Because
Yes.
that's what science
Right.
fiction is a leader in that in many, many ways of creating great films.
Right. Well, partially because you're always trying to show something that doesn't exist in the real world yet. And so you have
and you
to
have to-
invent ways to show it in a way that makes people believe it could be real.
Yeah, and in the process, you end up just coming up with these incredible techniques for making film. And Star Wars did that better than anybody.
Right. And so, admittedly, my wrestling was mostly not denying that it's science fiction, but for all of the times that I've admonished people for not recognizing that it is
It's fantasy. But as far as influence on the world at large, I think the influence has been more in the science fiction realm.
Yeah.
So as far as being a pillar, it's a pillar of storytelling, and it's the fantasy pillar of sci-fi in a lot of ways.
I like that, the fantasy pillar of sci-fi. That's great. Yes, Star Wars is taught. There were at my college, there were flyers of, hey guys, next spring, full course on Star Wars, literature 1005. But like the full courses about this movie are taught at universities.
Right.
Like it's that important to storytelling in general.
All right. Well, what else do we have on our list that's not Star Wars? I think we're back around to Marisha again. What else do you have on your list not Star Wars?
All right, so the next thing not Star Wars on my list is Back to the Future. Because in spite of the fact that, there were several, like our weird soiree into waking up in the 80s, and Back to the Future is the one that every time time travel comes up in anything, somebody says, "Where are you getting your facts from? Back to the Future?" I mean, literally, it is the benchmark for what people think of when they talk about time travel.
Yep.
It is the time travel movie. And not to discount Terminator, because it also it employed time travel. It was an important part of it, but there were a lot of kind of Skynet and the Terminators that kind of overshadowed the time travel element of it. But Back to the Future is just time travel. That's all it's about. And if I had $1 for every time I've heard references just in conversation or in other entertainment about flux capacitors and falling off a toilet or space-time continuum, that's not how time travel works, It's just so, the 80s, I was talking to Andrew, I feel like you could make a really good argument for pulling every single one of your pillars for sci-fi out of the 80s. If you consider Star Wars to be in the 80s, since it was still being made in the 80s. I think you could make a really good argument for Back to the Future and Terminator and Star Wars and Blade Runner. I mean, being kind of the benchmarks for what sci-fi has continued to be for 40 years now. So.
All right. Well, then, David, what else do you have on your list?
So this is down to my last one, because we talked about Star Wars, and I already mentioned Terminator and Jurassic Park. I'm sure we all have a ton of honorable mentions, and it's so hard not to put them all. But I have one slot left, so I'm going to use it with something that I really want to do. I love animation. Animation is so underrated, I think, sometimes, and looked over. Unfortunately, less so now. It's looked over, but for a long time it was sort of, oh, it's kids stuff, kids movie. I don't gotta watch it. I love animation so much, so I wanted to pick. I wanted to use one of my slots to talk about a animated sci-fi movie, and I really didn't know what was the first animated sci-fi movie or most important. So I just stopped overthinking it, and I just picked my favorite animated sci-fi movie to talk about. So I wanted to talk about The Iron Giant. It is a classic animated film. I don't know. Have you guys all seen The Iron Giant?
Yep.
It is. If you haven't, you have to. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. So it's there's this Iron Giant, this this big giant robot that is a weapon of destruction, and it talks about it, but the thing is, it doesn't really want to be. It meets this kid and gets very close to it, and the kid sort of tells him, you don't have to be this weapon of destruction just because you were created for that. It's very science fiction, big robot, questions of who you are. Is the robot a person? Does it have rights? All that kind of stuff that it tackles. And of course, it wasn't the first to do this, but I think it did it very, very well. And it has one of the most beautiful endings to any movie that I've ever seen. It's one of my favorite moments in all of film. There's a nuke that is going to go off that was fired at the giant, but the giant was at a public place. So he takes the nuke into space, and he closes his eyes and says, Superman, and then the nuke explodes and he sacrificed himself to save it because he came to love Superman because one of the things the kid showed him was like, look, you can be like this other thing from outer space. This guy came from outer space, but he's a superhero. You can be that too. So every time I watch that scene and he says Superman, I break down into tears. I'm thinking about it now, it makes me teary-eyed. It is excellent filmmaking. The animation is beautiful. It's a pretty old film now. I think it was made in the late 90s.
1999.
90, that's what I thought. Vin Diesel plays the giant, great voice acting performance. One of my favorite movies of all time. And like I said, I just wanted to talk about animated sci-fi because it's important. This is a movie that I will show my kids one day. It's important. And I didn't know what the first animated sci-fi thing was. I had no idea, so I just picked my favorite, and that is the Iron Giant.
All right. So we have the Iron Giant on the list now. And I actually want to go last because I'm still hoping somebody's fixing to name one of my other ones. Andrew, what'd you have next?
Okay, so Back to the Future. I had Back to the Future and Terminator kind of in my working list, but since those have been named,
Okay.
I had another one here that I really wanted in my top. I really wanted to work in here, and since it's not on the list yet, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Okay, you just helped me out because that absolutely belongs.
Me too, because it
it was on my
belongs,
list for a while.
but I didn't want to talk about it because I've never seen it.
Oh, we're gonna have to remedy that.
This dadgum movie.
It's one of the most beautiful movies ever made.
It is gorgeous. Stanley Kubrick is a film-making god. Leave the story to 2001 completely out of it. The way this movie is made is just glorious. And I'm putting a lot of hyperbole on it, but it's a gorgeous film, and the production that went into it, and we make such a big deal out of the music to Star Wars. Before Star Wars came along, this movie is the one that used that big, epic, classical music, and it's a wonderful movie, and it makes you. This was Andrew's pick, and I'm going on and on about it. Look, this is whenever we talk about thinking man sci-fi, this is it at its pinnacle.
It embodies that spirit of exploration. The music is fantastic. They used some new stuff and then some classical stuff, like the lander comes down to the Blue Danube Waltz, and the whole monolith scene at the beginning is one of the probably most mimicked scenes from any science fiction movie ever created. And then all of this wonderful movie that embodies the spirit of exploration, space exploration, and you also get this little bit of kind of this first time where we've talked about things in the novels. We talked about Asimov and his 3 laws of robotics, and in this one we kind of get this real, first big taste of what happens when that all goes very wrong.
Yep. And one of Asimov's contemporaries, Arthur C. Clarke,
right?
The writer on this one. So, it's just, but it does all the things you just mentioned, but it also really elevates, making you ask the big questions about the nature of existence, and it belongs on the list. And I definitely would. And to tell you the truth, it belongs on the list so much more than my other pick that I'm not even sure I'm going to mention my other pick. Because this is the right one. That's my 4 pillars for the films: Star Wars, Metropolis, Planet of the Apes, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Curious, what was your other pick?
The other one would have been Blade Runner.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
Blade Runner
would have been mine, except we already talked about The Dangerous Dream of Electric Sheep. But yeah, Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies ever. It inspired everything that my favorite parts of sci-fi. Blade Runner has all of it. I am constantly looking for the next movie that reminds me of Blade Runner. I want to be in the world of Blade Runner. I want to be the super cool space detective cop Harrison
Who
Ford.
fails, by the way? Who fails? Here's the thing: leaving the impact Blade Runner had on what came after it, even though that's the basis of our list here, or is what it's supposed to be, the things that that other sci-fi is built on. Just the story to Blade Runner is the entire Tears in the Rain monologue is one of the most beautiful pieces of cinema ever written.
For sure.
And oh, by the way, Decker fails. Like, it really is. The entire outcome of the movie would have been the same if Decker had ever been involved or not. Do you ever think about that? He actually never stops the cyborgs or the replicants. I'm sorry, he actually never stops the replicants. He just sort of holds out until Rutger Hauer's natural life would have ended anyway. Yeah. Which is sort of a running theme for Harrison Ford. People make the same case about Raiders of the Lost Ark. He had no impact on that movie whatsoever. But it's just that's one of those films that again does something that other sci-fi does, and maybe Blade Runner almost does it best, is the examination of what it means to be alive. And through the device of a replicant, of an android, essentially, they're man-made. But if they gain sentience, what is their right to life?
Right.
And it makes us examine the rights that we all have as human beings through that window of science fiction. So.
Yeah. I mean, in Blade Runner,
Blade Runner definitely belongs. And it still would have been my number 5.
And it's so important for Blade Runner is so important for dystopian storytelling. I mean, you think of a lot of, and I was talking about Altered Carbon a couple of weeks ago, and I mean that whole feel.
Here's the word. It's not just dystopian. Blade Runner created a whole nother subgenre of that, which Altered Carbon continues with cyberpunk, right? Is that the word that started getting used?
Yep.
Cyberpunk.
I was about to mention that, yeah.
Created the entire term.
Yeah.
Holy crap, I love cyberpunk. And this is why, here's the thing. I didn't put Blade Runner on my list because, one, we talked about the book, and two, Dad, the other night you told me it was on your list, so I left it off of mine to include Iron Giant. So we need to talk about it.
Yes.
Blade Runner is one of my favorite. Blade Runner is my favorite sci-fi world ever. I love the look of it. I love the feel of it. I love the way the guns look. I love the way the cars look. I love the way things sound. I just love all of it. And you're right, it created cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is amazing. And I don't like a lot of cyberpunk stuff because it goes a little too much on the punk side of it. But I love it, and I'm always looking for it. There's a game called Cyberpunk 2020, which is a role-playing game that I've played some of that I love, and there's a video game coming out called Cyberpunk 2077 that is actually starring Keanu Reeves that I am more excited for than anything in the world. I would murder a child to play that game right now. I want it so badly. No, I wouldn't. That's not okay. Don't murder children. But God, I love Blade Runner. So freaking cool, and I love Cyberpunk. I love that whole world. That is my peak favorite piece of science fiction. Like that is like if I could choose to live in a world like that, it would suck. It'd be horrible. It's dystopian. I'd be miserable and sad all the time.
But it would be so really cool.
But I would look really cool. And I'd wear a trench coat.
All right, so here is the question ultimately with Blade Runner. I think everybody kind of like has it right on the bubble. However, had all 4 of us chosen 4 completely different movies, we would have had 16 total. as it stands, we have 12 total.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't
Do
given
we-
you
It
my
belongs
list.
to
Oh,
the
you
top
still got
12,
one.
yes.
I've still got one.
Oh, you were supposed to give that before Daniel gave his last one. What do you have?
Okay, so mine was kind of a toss-up. I was like this close to going with Mad Max: The Road Warrior because
I was close.
it's like so weird and there's so much that's kind of been inspired by it. But ultimately, I landed on The Matrix, which I'm not typically the person
close
to
for me
go
too.
for something that recent, but The Matrix again is a movie that has been its themes have been constantly harped on in science fiction since. Again, every single time anything AI comes up, people say, haven't they seen Skynet? And, well, clearly this is the Matrix. If I had $1 for every time I've heard references to a glitch in the Matrix because of these 4 matching cars, or do you want the blue pill or the red pill? And so just all of that aside, the things that it did for film, the really innovative camera angles and, the way that it was shot has been really influential on how movies have been made ever since. So I felt like it deserved to kind of be on the list because even though, I mean, to me, the movie came out when I was a teenager, it's like, that can't possibly be a pillar of science fiction. But for everything that came after it, it's noticeable. You can watch action movies, and there's before the Matrix action movies, and there's after the Matrix action movies.
Mm-hmm. Everything wants to copy the Matrix.
Yep.
That's a good point. Yeah, Matrix was almost on there for me. I think that's a good choice. Mad Max was almost on there for me. So if we include Matrix and Mad Max, that gets us up to 14.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though. Like,
Yeah.
we could include Mad Max, but nobody really had that one. I mean, nobody really had that one very high up their list. And I would argue that if we're going to add one more kind of by
Virtue.
well, by the fact that we all considered it so strongly, I would say that we should put Blade Runner on our master list.
Yeah. Because it
Oh,
was
yeah.
on
Yeah.
everybody's.
Yes,
And that-
Blade Runner belongs on the master because Blade Runner would have been my number 5. If we're now going to have 14 total,
That's 14 total.
None of us are going to sit here and tell you Blade Runner is not a top 14 most important sci-fi movie because
Right.
it absolutely belongs in the top 14.
I have honorable mentions, man. I have honorable mentions.
We're stopping there. We got other stuff to talk
E.T.
about.
E.T.
We got other stuff to talk about.
I just want to say
Oh, no,
E.T.
we
E.T.
got other
is
I won't
a-
say anything else.
E.T. 's a
Just
strong
those
one.
two letters,
No,
E.T.
No, okay, you said it. E.T. All right, so that is our Pillars of Sci-Fi for the movie edition. And I'm sure Andrew will compile that list and have that
Yeah.
on the sciencefictionary.com for us soon. So we are going to continue with our weekly Star Trek reviews, which we began with the original series movies, moved through the Next Generation TV series, and we've now worked our way up to the final Next Generation film, Star Trek Nemesis. This is the one I have been waiting to get to, so I can ask David this one all-important question. What did you think of Tom Hardy's film debut?
Wait, was this his film debut?
There was one other film I think came out like the same year or the year before, but for
I think
all
it's fair to
intents and
count this
purposes,
as
this is considered his first major starring role. Yes. So, what did you think of the very young Tom Hardy as?
Okay, so what I have to say about that is his note I have written down. So there's that moment when he walks out, right? It's like they're meeting him for the first time, and he's all in dark, and it's set up to be like, oh, who is this? Is this somebody we know? We know this character. Who is it? Is it Wesley? What's going on? And he steps out, and it's this big shock. Supposed to be this big shocking moment. All the characters are like, but my honest to God thought was, is that Tom Hardy? I don't know what they wanted us
At
to
the
think.
time, nobody knew who Tom Hardy was. No, what they were going for was the big secret. There wasn't them revealing Shinzon's face to us, but it was revealing Picard's reaction
Yeah.
to
I
it.
know, I
When
know, I know,
Picard
I know that, I know that, I
recognizes
know that. But the
himself.
way that they filmed it and the way they framed it was this sort of like, I get where the big reaction is their thing, but it's like, were we supposed to go? He's bald. Is that a younger Picard? Like it's so bizarre the way it's filmed, and it's set up as this big mystery, like this big reveal, and it's like, were we supposed to go? He's bald and his nose is kind of big, and he's young. It's young Picard. He was cloned by the Romulans. Like, is that what we were supposed to do? I'm so confused.
No, well,
So
yeah, you
hard.
weren't the only one. Uh, the
What
movie.
the hell was this movie? Okay, so I don't hate it. I don't hate it. There are, and just like all Star Trek films, there are things that I do like about it. The first 30 minutes or so are pretty good, or more like 20 minutes. The first 20 minutes, everything up to Tom Hardy's big reveal is pretty good, and I'm actually like really enjoying it. And I'm like, I wonder what the big thing's gonna be that he keeps talking about. And I'm like, oh, that's it. And then they reveal he's the clone. Yeah, it's there are things that I liked about it, but overall, this is such a what I don't understand what the point. Like, so Insurrection like wasn't a great film, but I understood what the meaning was, what the point was, why it was made, and I
Mhm.
don't know what this movie was about. Dealing with your past actions and yourself and looking in a mirror, but not. I don't think it did that very well. A
No.
big wrap up for Data. That was great. Kind of good stuff for the Romulans. Him and the Romulans teamed up. Um, didn't feel as earned though as, for example, when the Klingons and Kirk made amends. Didn't feel as earned and as important and special. So it didn't really work for me. So
Right.
then, other than that, the only thing I take away from this movie is so this movie, the only thing that came out of this movie that worked is they killed Data.
Which actually also wasn't supposed to be permanent. So the
Really?
one thing you feel like they kind of got right that they earned wasn't even
Yeah.
really supposed to be a thing because they set up the idea that he had implanted his memories in B4. Remember that?
Right.
And there was going to be a fifth movie. This one did so poorly that they canceled the fifth movie.
Wow. Yeah, of course, and of course. I mean, that's another thing I did like. I did like B4. I thought that was pretty cool, and that's the thing. Like the first 20 minutes of the movie, I really enjoyed. I
Well, you,
really, really,
yeah, no,
and I like on the B4 stuff.
you've hit the nail on the head with this movie, though. It tried to do a lot of different things that it didn't do any of very well for me.
I liked the
Yeah.
movie. I don't know what y'all are talking about. I thought the movie was
Well,
You
no, I
great.
liked
was
the
just
movie?
going to ask you, actually, Marisha, because it's been this is the first time you've seen it in how long,
Yes,
or is this the
I've
first
never
time you've
seen
seen this
it.
one?
No, I've never seen this one.
Okay, but
Yeah,
you like
I got done with it. I looked at Andrew and I said, "Why do people hate this movie so much?" I really
well,
liked it. Now I agree. Like whenever he steps out and they're all having a reaction, and Andrew's like, "Are we supposed to recognize him?" It did give you that feel like, wait, did I miss something? So
Mm-hmm.
that definitely, like, once they went back and filled it in, it was like, yeah, they could have done that a little differently without making
right.
you feel like, okay, wait, did I was there something in the TV show that I just missed? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, is
Mm-hmm.
he like an illegitimate son that's showing up from somewhere? Especially after he starts talking about the hearing thing. But I really liked the movie. I did think that it definitely left some things open. Like, it really kind of drove home like how terribly the Romulans treated these Remans. Like the way that they
Mm-hmm.
enslaved them and subjugated them. And so, but yet in the end, the Romulans kind of came through and saved the day, which is not really how Star Trek usually works. Usually people get their comeuppance a little bit. You know, you don't wind up sort of on the side of the oppressors. So you know, 'cause there were some kind of theme things that, while they are believable in like a real world sense, that like sometimes the, you know, oppressed people, you know, can, you know, get on the top level and be the oppressors. And then, you know, then they're a problem too. It's not typically how Star Trek works. I felt like the way that they dealt with that wasn't really very Trekkian. But I really enjoyed kind of the interaction with Picard and Shinzon, because it was.
I did too.
No, and I did also, but that's one of the things I'm saying, that it started to sort of examine Shinzon's psyche from the point of view of he does wonder what he would have been like if he hadn't been raised on Remus. Like, they start to examine the nature versus nurture sort of question, and who he could have been, or who Picard may have been, and it starts to get interesting, and then they just kind of drop it, and Shinzon just goes way off the deep end with he's going to destroy Earth. So he's, you know, and it's like, it starts to do a lot of things that are really interesting, and either doesn't pay them off or just doesn't do them very well. I will admit this is actually sort of my guilty pleasure Star Trek movie, because it's still Tom Hardy. Okay, for all the faults in that character, Tom Hardy just eats up the screen like he still does to this day.
Yep.
He could do it then. He totally owns every scene he's in this movie. He's fun to watch. And it's just, I don't know, I like the last space battle, except I will admit that one of the issues with this movie, it has actually been said that some of the character development scenes that were actually shot got cut so they could have more of the space battle.
Really?
And I'm always more of a supporter and a fan of character.
Especially in Star Trek.
As much as I like that space battle, I would have.
I do like the space battle.
Have seen. Yeah, but I would have liked to have seen some more character development for some of this.
Well,
stuff.
like you said, it kind of reaches. It's kind of like you could call it Star Trek: The Road Not Taken, because it's like they build up so many ideas and then just don't go there.
Yeah.
You know, because like you're saying with Shinzon, they build him up, and you kind of start to come in. He's a pretty interesting villain, and then he becomes like the most simplistic villain who's just going to destroy. Like that, like by the end, his only goal is to destroy.
He's like this evil Hulk, kind of just smash.
And you don't earn that transformation at all by showing him pushed anywhere. You get a lot of backstory to how he got to the point we saw him, but you just sort of drop all the interesting things about him just for the plot device of he's going to destroy Earth. This is what the stakes are now. Well, no, a minute ago the stakes were who he and Picard are as people. Like, that's way more interesting.
Yeah, it sets up that that nature versus nurture conversation, and then it touches on it a little bit, but it never pays off. It sets up a question that it never answers. But not in the good way to make you think. It just kind of forgets that the question was even asked.
Right.
And it just falls apart.
What makes it worse is I think it thinks answers it.
Yeah. It thinks it's clever like all the other Star Trek movies.
Right, because, oh, by the way, Shinzon is bad because of his nurture. So there, we answer the question for you. Well, no, that was like just sort of an easy out, right?
Yeah.
Even though, again, I end up enjoying the darn movie.
There are a lot of fun scenes in the movie.
Okay, and I'm gonna say
the wedding scene at the beginning is great. The space battle is great. There's some interesting stuff with Picard. I feel like, You know, even though, like you said, we kind of set it up to not be permanent. You know, like
That's how you kill off
the
a character.
Data's death, like that. Yeah, that's how you kill an important character.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
Not, I
I
mean,
love the they set it up earlier that he had this
mhm.
transporter on him. They
mm-hmm.
could get him back.
Yeah.
You know, Chekhov's gun. You show a gun, you got to use it.
As,
They set it up. I thought that was
as
really good.
salty nerd is so fond of telling us, set up and pay off.
Yep.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's true, and I did like that. I think the movie looks great.
Yeah.
Some of the shots are cool. I love the look of the ships and the blasters. By the way, I think this started in First Contact, or maybe it started in Insurrection. I don't know. The new uniforms with like the gray jumpsuits, I'm not a fan of.
Ugly. The
It's ugly. Doesn't work for me at all.
Everything got darker and more
Speaking of
gritty.
Everything got
ugly,
dark.
that bridge was the ugliest thing I have ever seen in a space movie.
I'm mixed on it.
Really? I hated it.
It's not my favorite, but I think overall the ships looked pretty good. But that bridge, I agree with
The
you. Like,
bridge looked like it just came out of the worst parts of 1985. I mean, it was like all of like the dark paneling and the dark carpet and the ugly chairs.
Yeah.
It was like, ooh, what can we do that's different and looks like it's 30 years old and is really ugly.
yeah, I agree.
Like I said, overall, I really like the movie. Why? Okay, so Star Trek TV shows, the same uniforms through the whole runs. Star Trek movies, new uniforms
'Cause you
every
got the
single
budget.
movie.
Because you have the budget to
But
do it.
it
Then why does
messes
it
with the
look worse?
continuity and it looks worse.
Because they, I mean, the uniforms in the show are fantastic. I mean, did such a great job with those. It's like, I mean, you know, even newer things, non-Star Trek things. Look at the Orville. The Orville did. You don't even have to like the Orville. You can't tell me they did a bad job with the uniforms.
Yep.
But it's like you get a director with a big, wants to put his own stamp on it. It's kind of like redesigning the Batman suit every time you do a movie. And sometimes you make a really good one, and sometimes Batman has nipples.
That's that's a great point. Yeah, and something that I noticed, I really love the way the blasters look.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they look really cool. I'm not a fan of when they look like TV remotes. Like I get what they're going for, like efficiency and design. Man, make it a gun. It's cool.
And how beautiful was Romulus? I mean, like I watched it and I
Yeah.
was like, oh, look, here's what a Star Trek movie looks like after the prequels. This is what a
right.
Star Trek movie looks like after the Phantom Menace comes out and completely,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it's Naboo in Star Trek.
Right, yeah, and I love that those opening bits. Like that's in the beginning, and I love all that. I think some of the shots are super super cool. I love the shot of Data and B4 back to back, and the head goes over. But also there was some use of some really awkward, weird slow motion sometimes that I noticed that really bothered me. Like, okay, you're trying a little too hard, pal. There are some cool lines I like. I like when Picard and Data get in the ship, and Data goes, "Should I drive, Captain?" And Picard just looks at him like, "Of course not. Like, why would you even ask me that? I'm Picard. I drive." I thought that was great.
Yeah.
There's this great line where he says, "Victory of the Echo over the voice." That was a pretty good line. I like that whole thing. That's kind of all I like. I really want to touch on something. It's a touchy subject, but I have to bring it up.
Is it when they go to Mad Max Planet?
Oh no! Wait, I kind of like that.
Yeah, I like Mad Max Planet. I did
I
think
like
that
Mad
the
Max
the
Planet.
Argo is kind of silly.
Yeah.
And I
but
say
kinda
that
like
the
it.
Argo is kind of silly because they tried to
But
make
it's kinda
something
fun.
cool and futuristic. But at the same time, like in real life at that point in time, we had way cooler, better, like real life off-road vehicles.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I liked everything on there. I like Picard's attitude about it. I like Worf. I like using the big blaster. I like that kind of stuff. I actually really like that.
Yeah.
I couldn't watch it. It was the mind rape scene.
Yes.
I
There.
couldn't watch it. I mean, I skipped past it, but then I'm like, fine. I need to see what happened. So I rewinded, and it just made me so uncomfortable. Now I get it. He's the bad guy. He does bad things. I
Yep.
get it. But there's a difference between like Kylo Ren taking information out of Rey's mind and this guy actually going into her mind and having sex
Oh,
with
she's in
her.
the middle of making love with her husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It made me
being a
really
part of it.
sick
Yeah,
feeling.
it's
I do like at the end she got her big moment
right.
where she goes back into that guy's mind and she's like, like just wrecks him. I do think that was great. I like how they handled it in the way where they don't shy away from how
They
messed
did
up it
not
is.
shy away from it. They absolutely owned it. It is
They
what they
did.
were trying to do. It's the point they were trying to make, and they
I just wish
made
they would
no
have talked about it.
bones about it. I mean, they actually, to give them, you can either deride them for choosing to include a rape scene, or you can applaud them for not shying away from it and not shying
I
away
agree.
from. And now I will tell you, it almost feel. I want to say they didn't shy away from the impact of it or the seriousness of it or the consequences of it, but it almost feels like maybe they could have even done it more.
Yeah, they brushed over it a little too much for me.
They did,
That's the
because,
part I don't like.
and
If you're,
especially involving her husband
They
in
made
it. I
it
mean,
clear, yeah, but they made it clear that that's what it was, and they made it clear that Troy felt that Troy knew it was a violation, and they made it clear she was pissed off about it. And at the whenever she's in his mind, finding them while they're cloaked, and she says, "Remember me?" They tried,
yeah.
like they didn't shy away from what they were doing.
that's true.
It could have been a lot worse if they had just done it half.
Half-assed.
You know what I
Now,
mean?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I do appreciate that they didn't try and make it like, because sometimes Game of Thrones they can make rape scenes it's like, this is not an entertainment thing, it's like they kind of really drag it out and make it graphic and make it long and all of that. And
Right.
I appreciate that. I mean, of course they probably couldn't have gotten away with it then, honestly, but
Yeah.
that's at least if you're going to go there, at least don't paint it as anything other than completely despicable. But yeah,
That's
it was
true.
it was hard to watch. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and I did want to hear your opinions on it, of course, because you're the what did you say last week?
The token female in the
the
group.
token female on the
token
show.
female on the
I
show.
did want to hear your opinions on it because, like, in my opinion, just from my observations of it, like, I think I like the way they handled it, but I wish they would have, if you're gonna do it, touch on it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Really call it out as like I like that Picard, the second Picard knew about it, there was no trying to defend it. There was no remember no like Picard was like, oh, so he's evil, that sucks, really
Mm-hmm.
wish that he wasn't, you know.
Yeah.
I think it did well playing into like the sort of maybe the theme of like, that Picard would never do something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of plays into the overall theme a bit, which is good. I do love Troy's character so very much.
And she
And
kicks butt in this movie.
she does.
I mean,
And I think it is good redemption. Sorry, I'm sorry. Continue.
No, go ahead. I was just I was agreeing with you that
Yeah. It reminds me of this scene, and we never got to talk about it, but it was back in season 1 of the show. It was this episode where she was like, basically she was impregnated by an alien,
mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
I actually, to be fair, I did not finish watching the episode because it made me so uncomfortable. Because the next scene after it was a bunch of men sitting in a room arguing over what they're going to do about it, not even asking her what she thought. And that made me really uncomfortable. And she's just sitting there, and it's just a bunch of dudes like, yeah, so we should kill it, right? Yeah, okay, Deanna, you're going to kill it. And she's like, wait, hold up, wait a minute. And it made me really uncomfortable, and I didn't like how they handled that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then she
they
said,
didn't
I want
handle
to
that
keep
one
it.
well at all.
And then they were like, but you can't. And it's like, excuse me. And I didn't even finish the episode because it made me so upset, because I really genuinely love Deanna.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's a great character. I made the joke that she's like my crush, but not just because I think she's beautiful. I really like her. I think she's awesome. And so this kind of felt like, yes, it made me uncomfortable, but it was almost like a redemption for that of like,
Right. Kind of
yeah,
read.
this bad thing happened to her. It does not define her. She she does not let it overtake her completely. But when it came time for, oh, I can get back at him and show him that I am not powerless, and I'm going to use his powers against him, so to speak. Like
Yes.
it
Remember
was
me.
it was a
Yeah.
great way of getting back at him, and I thought that was a really epic moment when she's like guiding Worf's hand of where to go. I thought that was freaking dope.
Yeah,
And
she
I
really
love
got her vindication, her vindication moment. And it's like whenever you get to that point, you're like, okay, I understand why they decided to do that. Not only to establish this character is evil, but also because she's a gentle person. She's
yeah,
not a blow the ship up kind of person.
which they do again. They blow up another Enterprise.
But you have officially pushed her too far. And
Yeah, and she
and
doesn't
so
need Riker to do something about it.
right. And I also love that we get to see her in command of the Enterprise.
Yeah, I thought that
Mhm.
was cool too. When
That's the first
when
time
I
we've
think
seen that, isn't
when
it?
Data leaves and
I think
he's
so.
like, "Counselor, you have the bridge." I
I
thought
was
that
like,
was great.
yes. I feel like, yeah, she really. I mean, like I said, I was really excited. Whenever when she had command, and that, she was just okay. So for a long time on Star Trek, she was the acknowledged sex symbol. She was the eye candy. She was there to be pretty and to make sure that a certain contingent of men kept watching. She didn't really need a brain. She just was kind of a plot device. And I feel like this movie really definitely moved her. If there was ever any doubt that Deanna Troy is formidable, like we have just
They,
finally established that she is.
And for all of for
they
all
moved that way in the series too, though.
they do.
They did. They moved away from that. She couldn't even wear the uniform. She
Right.
had the low cut
Yep.
dress and all that stuff. She eventually wore the uniform. She became that character got more and more respect and more to do and more. They moved away from that throughout the series. But you
They
are
did.
right. This was
They
sort of
did.
the pinnacle of it.
And for all of that and all of the things that were done with her character in this movie, Marina Sirtis is the one that called Stuart Baird, the director, an idiot.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Really?
She
Wait, what's
did.
the story
Oh,
behind
she
that?
hated him.
They all hated him.
He They all hate him. He wanted to, and like I said, I enjoy seeing Tom Hardy on screen, but Stewart's whole thing was like he didn't really know Star Trek at all. He was a complete outsider,
Hmm.
and he tried to make it like a non-Star Trek movie, for like I don't know how else to put it. He wanted to focus so much on the villain and what was going on there that he never spent time focusing on the characters and the crew. That was the or that was the feeling of the cast anyway.
Right.
That and that's what led Marina Sirtis to call him an idiot. None of them really liked the way Stewart handled the film at all, and of course Jonathan Frakes had directed the previous two movies
He did a great.
and did do a good job. But Baird actually says that there was never any animosity between he and Frakes about the directing of the movie. Jonathan Frakes was directing. I think he was trying to finish Clock Stoppers at the time they started production on this. He wouldn't have been able to do it even if it had been offered to him. So they say there was no animosity there, but still, I think maybe after having worked with one of their own so closely on the previous two films, there was going to be a little underlying
You don't understand Star
animosity,
Trek.
for a better word,
Yep.
or resentment, bringing an outsider in to work with people who whenever, even when you count Rick Berman and Michael Piller, the producers, they've been involved with Star Trek for 15 years at this point. They had all been together. He was just kind of the outsider.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's totally it. It is the worst Star Trek movie. So Marina Sirtis and other people on the cast who may feel the same way she does probably have a point. Maybe he was an idiot. I don't know. But yeah, they weren't. The cast as a whole was not happy with this film.
So
Of
you
course,
say
Chris Spiner actually wrote it, so I don't know what his feelings were on it. But
Who wrote it?
Brent Spiner.
Oh, okay.
really?
Yeah,
Which, by the way,
I do
he did a
notice he was.
great job in this movie. I always mention, I always want to touch on it because he really shines for me in all these
Yes.
films as Data and as B4. I love when he gets to play a different android, and oh my god, one of my favorite moments in the movie, like genuinely like funny, hilarious, is when he's pretending to be B4 and they're on the ship, they're on the enemy ship, and Tom Hardy's like, go, and he's like, where? It's so funny, and then it's even funnier when you find out later that it was Data the whole time
Right.
pretending. And I love the setup. I love that, like
By the way,
earlier
they
in the
didn't
movie.
hide that very well. If you didn't know that was Data when he first beamed on board after Data had just told Picard we have a tactical advantage, like you just weren't paying attention.
Well, okay. So I guess I'm a. Well, here's the truth. I was bored by the movie, so I kind of like probably wasn't paying attention that much. But I did see the scene where, of course, he says tactical advantage. So then when I find out it's Data, it all floods back. Oh, that's the advantage. They set it up. Okay, great. But you're right. I probably would have noticed that if the movie wasn't so boring and I was paying even closer attention to it. For example, I did not miss a single beat in Star Trek First Contact. And this one, I think I was watching it while like cooking dinner or something because I was like, I'm gonna go cook dinner. I don't have time to wait through this. So yeah, but you said this was the worst. Andrew and Marisha, where do you guys think this one ranks out of all these original 9 movies? Now we still got the Kelvin stuff, which we're gonna watch, and then at the end of it, I think we could rank all Star Trek movies, put them in a ranking, and come back. But where do you guys think for this one?
I mean, let's see.
You know, it's certainly near the bottom.
Yeah.
I'm trying to.
You're just such a nice guy. That's all. Tell the truth.
I don't know which one is worse.
There's not one worse. All right, so look, since y'all don't have to think about it so hard, let me actually get all my final thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
To sum it up.
Wait. But can we just talk before you sum it up? Y'all, did anybody else cry whenever they're playing Blue Skies at the end? I was way more cut up about them killing Data than I was when they killed Kirk a couple of movies ago.
Yeah, me too. Actually.
I mean,
That's a
come
good
on
point.
now.
I did like the end, and Deanna's crying, and they're all crying, and I thought that was actually a really great scene.
That's
also.
how you kill off a beloved character that people are attached
They did a
to.
good job with that one. They did. That one hit the mark in ways that maybe Kirk's missed it. It was more emotional. It was more felt. It was also more unexpected. I think is one of the big things. When they made Generations, you kind of expected, when you knew Kirk was in it, you kind of expected him not to make it through it. That just made sense. So no, I like the way they handled Data's death in this. Just like I like the way they handled his ultimate death here recently in Picard.
Yeah.
Um,
With
but
the
no, but
same song.
Yeah. My final thoughts on this one are I do think it's the worst Star Trek film. That being said, it's only the worst because Insurrection isn't just blatantly bad. Insurrection is just forgettable. There's nothing outstanding about Insurrection one or the other.
I don't know though. I mean, the thing is like, I would rewatch Nemesis despite all its faults, and I just could care less if I ever see Insurrection again.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Like I said a minute ago, this is my guilty pleasure Star Trek movie. It's the worst film.
I think I agree.
I would still watch it again before I'd watch Insurrection again. There's nothing about Insurrection that excites me at all. At least in this one, I enjoy you know, some of the special effects in the space battle, and I enjoy watching Tom Hardy on screen.
At least in this one, Riker has his beard.
This one's stupid enough to have fun with.
I agree.
You know?
And the thing is, and I'm sure y'all are going to disagree with me because y'all have a real love for those original series movies, but now that I'm looking at the list here, and I don't think any of these movies are bad, but easily the most forgettable one is Insurrection, and then next to it, I'd probably say The Search for Spock.
I think you're right.
Oh, what?
Y'all
have lost y'all's minds.
There are not many memorable scenes for me in The Search for Spock, and I'd say the same thing about The Final Frontier.
Oh my God.
I'd probably put Nemesis above The Search for Spock in The Final Frontier. At least The Final Frontier.
What?
I wasn't a fan of The Final Frontier.
No, you really weren't.
David, really, I know we're blood and everything, and I hate to do this to you, but you are off the cast. I apologize for this. You can have your mother call me later, whatever.
Thanksgiving's gonna get awkward.
Just do that before I can take it. You're officially
fired.
You're off the podcast.
The Search for Spock?
Yes, I like The Search for Spock.
What's your favorite scene in The Search for Spock?
Oh, The Search for Spock. I mean, I will tell you, The Search for Spock's a better movie than Nemesis.
Your favorite scene in The Search for Spock?
Favorite scene of Search for Spock is when they're on the Genesis planet and Spock has matured to the age where he's going through Pong Far and Savick is there with him. That's my favorite scene in Search for Spock. I don't know why, but I really love that scene.
Savick was in Search for Spock? See, I don't remember the frickin' movie.
I think I may be with you, David. And you can't fire me because you can't fire the token female. You know that's how the world works.
Yeah, or you don't want to get the Science Fictionary canceled.
I am an equal opportunity offender, Marissa.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to go after you on Twitter. Just you watch.
Well, I respect a woman's right to equality so much that I will fire one just as equally.
As your son.
Oh my gosh. First of all, I want to say I'm joking, but anyway. Y'all, I guess it's okay to be wrong.
I guess I like Data enough that I would watch Nemesis again over that, and over those two.
I will watch Nemesis over Insurrection, absolutely.
I agree.
The Search for Spock's a better movie than either one of them.
Probably.
Okay, I'll take it.
I'd watch Nemesis again.
And that's where like they say in Moneyball, you get the answer you won't hang up. That's where we'll end the show. Marisha, until next time, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me at princessesandpadawans.com, on Instagram at princesses_and_padawans, and ppadawans on Twitter.
And Andrew?
All right, you can find me running the Twitter account for this show at Sci_Fictionary. You can find me at thesciencefictionary.com. You can drop us a line at thesciencefictionary@gmail.com. You can check out my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/darklighter580. And as always, you can check out our show as well as the rest of our podcast family at red5network.com.
All right, and David?
You guys can find me on Twitter at stay_creativeed and on my YouTube channel, Creative D&D.
All right, and I am Dan C. Peeps on Twitter, and we'll see you next time.
Hello there.
Rancho Obi-Wan, the Guinness World Records certified largest Star Wars memorabilia collection, located in Petaluma, California, featuring the collection of super collector, author, and Star Wars fan ambassador Steve Sansweet.
The most powerful Jedi ever.
Visit RanchoObi-Wan.org and subscribe to the Rancho Obi-Wan Virtual Museum, a fun, authentic fan experience featuring rare photos, videos, Steve Sansweet Q&As, virtual tours of the museum, exclusive behind behind-the-scenes stories and information, and so much more. Plus, your subscription helps ensure the future of the museum. It's the Rancho Obi-Wan Virtual Museum. Subscribe now at ranchoobi-wan.org. Get tons of cool perks, information, and history of Star Wars collecting from the man who knows it best, Steve Sansweet, while contributing to the preservation of the world's largest Star Wars memorabilia collection. ranchoobi-wan.org.